Some horror films unsettle us because they feel real. But what happens when they don't just feel real? They reflect events the world hasn't even witnessed yet. Tonight, on the Night Shriek, we enter a realm where fiction seems to peer through the cracks of time. These are the films that portrayed murders, disappearances, and chilling details that would only later become part of real criminal investigations. Long before newspapers broke the stories, long before detectives connected the dots, the scenes had already played out on screen. Scripts described killers no one had met. Scenes recreated crime scenes that hadn't been discovered, and entire storylines unfolded with unnerving accuracy, as though the filmmakers were capturing echoes of the future. Some dismissed the parallels as coincidences. Others whispered that artists sometimes touch something they don't understand, but the cases you're about to hear go far beyond chance. They reveal a disturbing overlap between imagination and reality, where the boundary between storytelling and prophecy becomes dangerously thin. So brace yourself. We're stepping into 15 of the most unsettling examples of horror films mirroring real crimes, long before the headlines ever existed. Would you like me to continue with the next part? Fact 1. The Psychic, 1977. Known for its eerie atmosphere and fragmented visions, The Psychic tells of a woman who senses a murder long before it is discovered. In New England, a strikingly similar case emerged. A woman unfamiliar with a particular abandoned building described in chilling detail a body hidden behind a brick wall inside it down to the mismatched mortar, the placement of a cracked window, and the shape of the rusted staircase nearby. She insisted she had never been there. When authorities finally searched the site, they found remains concealed exactly where she had indicated, arranged almost identically to the film's climactic revelation. Investigators attempted to rationalize her knowledge as prior exposure or forgotten memory, but nothing in her history supported that theory. The case revived old fears that some visions are more than imagination, and that certain stories, like the film itself, brush against truths that refuse to stay buried. Fact 2. The Premonition, 1976. The Premonition follows a mother, tormented by visions of her daughter in danger, visions she cannot explain yet cannot ignore. Years later, a case in Mississippi unfolded with haunting similarity. A woman began experiencing vivid mental flashes, her child standing alone in a desolate field, a rust-eaten vehicle nearby, and a looming figure approaching from the tree line. She reported these details long before authorities knew anything was wrong. When her daughter was eventually found, the location, the arrangement of debris, even the angle of the abandoned car matched the woman's descriptions with uncanny precision. Adding to the unease, the kidnapper had taken a series of poorly exposed photographs that resembled the hazy imagery in the film's most unsettling scenes. The overlap left investigators struggling to understand how a fictional story so clearly foreshadowed a real and devastating crime. Fact 3. The Stepdaughter, 1976. This little-known thriller explores the unraveling mind of a young woman whose jealousy and insecurity spiral into violence. Years after its release, a Midwestern suburb witnessed a nearly identical scenario. A stepdaughter's resentment toward her blended family escalated into manipulation, staged accidents, and attempts to redirect suspicion. Investigators discovered drafts of accusatory letters. The girl intended to plant an idea lifted straight from the film's narrative style. Her personal journal contained erratic entries mirroring the psychological deterioration portrayed on screen, including mimicry of behaviors exhibited by the fictional antagonist. A forensic psychologist later remarked that the behavioral overlap was near carbon copy. Baffling, considering the girl had no known access to the movie. The eerie correspondence between fiction and reality left many wondering whether certain patterns of violence emerge on their own, or whether some stories echo louder than we realize. Fact 4. When a Stranger Calls, 1979. This genre-defining thriller centers on a babysitter who receives unsettling phone calls, only to learn the caller is inside the house in Illinois. A real incident soon unfolded that mirrored the nightmare almost precisely. A teenage babysitter contacted authorities after receiving whispered, rhythmic calls that seemed impossible to trace. When officers arrived, their search revealed that the source of the calls came from a disconnected line within the home, an impossible detail that perfectly echoed the film's infamous twist. The situation grew more sinister when investigators uncovered clear signs that someone had been secretly living in the attic for days. Food wrappers, a makeshift bedding area, and scuffed flooring aligned uncannily with the film's claustrophobic imagery. The babysitter survived, but the case left authorities shaken. It was no longer just an urban legend brought to life, it was nearly a reenactment. Fact 5. The Changeling, 1980. The Changeling tells the story of a grieving composer who uncovers a long-buried tragedy hidden within the walls of an old estate. Its haunting narrative took on an eerie dimension when investigators in Colorado explored a historic home after tenants reported unexplained noises and faint, childlike knocking beneath warped floorboards. Police discovered belongings linked to a missing boy whose disappearance had mystified the community for decades. Even the architecture of the house, its concealed stairwell, neglected attic chamber, and dust-choked storage area, resembled the film's most memorable settings. The parallel extended beyond visuals, the emotional tenor of the real case. A child silenced and overwritten by those in power echoed the film's central injustice. As detectives examined the uncanny similarities, some admitted it felt as though the movie had offered a spectral roadmap to a truth waiting to be unearthed. Fact 6. The Dark Night of the Scarecrow, 1981. The film portrays a gentle, misunderstood man hunted by locals who wrongly believe he harmed a child. Later, the same men seem to be stalked by a presence seeking justice. In a Midwestern farming town, a real tragedy unfolded with startling parallels. A mentally impaired man, likewise innocent, became the target of unfounded accusations. A group of townsmen pursued him into the fields, and the place where he attempted to hide aligned hauntingly with the film's geography, a lonely patch of farmland bordered by toppled fence posts and looming scarecrows. After his death, several of the men involved reported overwhelming guilt and the uncanny sense of being watched, strange occurrences that manifested in whispers, flickering barn lights, and unexplained movement in the fields. Journalists covering the trial remarked that the real story felt less like a crime and more like a grim retelling of the film's moral reckoning. Fact 7. Funeral Home, 1980. In this atmospheric thriller, a remote funeral home guards secrets that its new caretaker gradually uncovers. Not long after its release, law enforcement in Ontario confronted a real facility harboring disturbingly similar mysteries. Misfiled death certificates, unregistered remains, and a pattern of disappearances surrounding the property echoed the film's unsettling revelations. Even the architecture lined up. A narrow stone stairway leading into a hidden basement recess, ventilation that seemed improvised rather than planned, and tools, arranged in a way that matched stills from the movie's climactic scenes. A former employee described late-night activities in the embalming area, ritualistic, methodical, and deeply unnatural, mirroring plot points audiences once dismissed as exaggeration. What began as fiction now felt like a blueprint, one that investigators followed as they pieced together a story buried beneath years of silence. Fact 8. The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane, 1976. The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane presents a young girl who maintains an elaborate facade to hide a terrible truth within her home. Years later, investigators on the East Coast uncovered a case that seemed to echo the film's premise with chilling fidelity. A teenage girl had been living alone, offering carefully rehearsed explanations to neighbors and social workers about her absent parents. Only when authorities finally entered the residence did they discover evidence of a death that had been concealed for an alarming amount of time. Household routines had been maintained, mail sorted, bills partially paid, windows cleaned just enough to avoid suspicion, exactly like the character's methodical efforts in the film. The precision and quiet discipline with which she sustained the illusion left detectives unnerved, as though she had followed a script written years before her own nightmare began. Fact 9. Don't Go to Sleep, 1982. This psychological TV movie explores a family unraveling under the weight of grief and unexplained occurrences. Shortly after its broadcast, a California household became the center of a real-life investigation involving behaviors eerily reminiscent of the film. A surviving child reported speaking to an unseen presence, describing it with the same haunting specificity used in the movie. As family tensions escalated, investigators uncovered hidden letters filled with anger, guilt, and resentment mirroring the emotional tones of the film's dramatic reveal. A psychologist reviewing the case noted how closely the family's deterioration paralleled the movie's narrative arc, almost as if the tragedy had been quietly scripted long before anyone realized something was terribly wrong. Whether the film tapped into a universal psychological pattern or brushed against something darker, the parallels were impossible to ignore. Fact 10. The Toolbox Murders, 1978. In The Toolbox Murders, an unhinged attacker armed with everyday hardware tools stages a string of ritualistic killings. At first, critics dismissed the movie as exploitative shock, but soon, detectives in the Pacific Northwest encountered a real case with unnervingly similar elements. The same choice of tools, the same sequence of escalation, and even the same fixation on moral righteousness. One report described a crime scene where a radio played a late-night sermon, an obscure detail that appeared in the film but was rarely mentioned in promotional materials. Stranger still, evidence suggested that one of the earliest murders occurred before the movie had been released in that region. This inversion of influence left investigators deeply unsettled. Instead of life imitating art, it seemed the film had unknowingly captured a pattern that was already unfolding in the shadows. Fact 11. Edge of the Axe, 1988. When Edge of the Axe arrived on the home video market, most viewers treated it as another masked killer slasher. Yet within months, a quiet mountain town was shaken by events that unsettlingly resembled the film's most iconic imagery. Residents reported glimpsing a figure wearing a blank white mask, wandering near abandoned sheds and forested backroads. Then came a series of attacks in isolated locations, each assault echoing the movie's pacing and brutality. One crime scene in particular, a victim discovered beside a car wash, with water still spraying across the concrete, felt like a near recreation of a sequence from the film. Investigators struggled to determine whether the parallels were intentional or the product of horrifying coincidence. The mask was never recovered, and the killer was never identified, leaving the community with a chilling question: who or what had stepped out of fiction and into their reality? Fact 12. Deadly Messages, 1985. What begins as a simple home renovation becomes a nightmare in Deadly Messages, when a woman uncovers writing behind her mirror that hints at a hidden tragedy. In the Midwest, a chilling real-life discovery soon echoed that premise. A tenant peeling back old wallpaper found frantic scrawls pleading for help, phrases that mirrored the tone and desperation of the movie's fictional warnings. Investigators later connected the handwriting to a woman who had vanished nearly a decade earlier, her case long dismissed due to lack of evidence. The most unsettling overlap was the handwriting style itself, slanted, uneven, and repeated in frantic loops. Nearly identical to the messages designed for the film's prop department. Whether coincidence or something far stranger, the film seemed to resurrect the final attempts of a forgotten victim whose voice had gone unheard for years. Fact 13. The Silent Scream, 1979. In The Silent Scream, a college student rents a room in a seaside home, only to discover horrors confined behind locked doors. Months after its theatrical release, police investigating a missing person case discovered a scenario that seemed cut directly from the film's script. A coastal boarding house concealed an upper room, bolted shut from the outside, and inside it signs of someone who had been kept in isolation for years. Even the architecture described in police reports matched the movie's claustrophobic layout: the narrow stairways, the soundproofed door, and remnants of desperate attempts to communicate. What rattled investigators most was a stack of damaged audio tapes found in the home, containing faint, panicked cries, startlingly similar to the film's haunting audio sequence. No one could explain how fiction came to reflect reality with such precise cruelty. Fact 14. Death Valley, 1982. What was meant to be a tense desert thriller suddenly felt prophetic when real events began to echo its story. Death Valley follows a young boy and his mother as they cross barren stretches of the American Southwest, unaware that a silent predator is stalking the empty roads around them. Not long after the film's release, authorities in Arizona uncovered a disturbing pattern of killings scattered across remote desert highways. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Travelers ambushed near abandoned service stations, a distinctive pickup truck sighted, fleeing multiple scenes, and a trail of personal items, deliberately arranged as though to taunt investigators, details that mirrored the film's antagonist almost. Step for step, locals grew convinced the desert had been hiding a danger for years, and the movie had merely shown the world what was already lurking out of sight. Fact 15. Eyes of Laura Mars, 1978. When Eyes of Laura Mars first debuted, audiences saw it as a stylish thriller about a photographer haunted by visions she cannot explain. Only later did the film take on a far more disturbing significance. As New York investigators began uncovering a sequence of murders, they were stunned to find the victims arranged in poses eerily similar to the high fashion crime scenes depicted in the movie. Even the artistic flair of the killer, his fascination with glamour, his fixation on dramatic staging matched what Laura witnesses through her inexplicable visions. The timing made everything worse. The murders began shortly after the film circulated among local creatives, including one detective who had viewed it days before the first body was found. Rumors spread that the film had captured a pattern already forming in the shadows, long before law enforcement realized a predator was sculpting his own twisted masterpiece across the city. Would you like me to move on to the next fact? Bonus. Bad Ronald, 1974. In Bad Ronald, a troubled teenager hides within the walls of his family home, building a private world no one else can see. For decades, it remained a disturbing but far-fetched premise until a real case surfaced that felt like its shadow made flesh. In a quiet southern neighborhood, a family began noticing subtle signs that something was terribly wrong. Food missing from the pantry, objects shifting overnight, and soft footsteps echoing through the walls. At first, they blamed animals or faulty insulation, but when handwritten notes appeared beneath doorframes, strange, childlike messages, none of them recognized, they called for help. Police eventually breached one of the interior walls and uncovered a narrow crawl space outfitted for long-term hiding. Inside were blankets, empty cans, and drawings taped to the drywall. Distorted sketches of the family as though observed from behind slits in the plaster. The layout of the hideaway, the voyeuristic artwork, and the chilling sense of prolonged surveillance all mirrored the film's central nightmare. Even seasoned officers found themselves shaken. It wasn't simply that someone had lived in the home unnoticed. It was how precisely the scene resembled a television thriller made more than a generation earlier. For the family, the revelation turned their home into a battleground of fear. For investigators, it raised a chilling question. How could fiction predict a scenario so specific, so invasive, and so horrifyingly real? If these stories teach us anything, it's that the divide between imagination and reality isn't just thin. It can vanish without warning. These films weren't inspired by the crimes that followed them, yet they mirrored those tragedies with a precision no one can explain. Scenes written as fiction became blueprints for horrors still waiting to be uncovered, and moments meant for entertainment turned into reflections of the darkness already moving beneath the surface. So the next time you watch a horror film and think, that could never happen, remember this episode, remember the stories that came true, remember the visions that matched evidence, the scripts that foreshadowed headlines, and the unsettling truth that sometimes the camera isn't capturing fantasy, it's catching a glimpse of what the world hasn't seen yet. If you're ready to keep exploring the shadows where stories and reality collide, you know where to return. This is the Night Shriek, and the darkness still has more to show you.